Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn out of poem 635, I think the longest hour of all. Another poem about anticipation. And some have thought maybe this is about Sam Boyle's return from Europe on the 16th of November, 1862. It's possible that that's what's standing behind this project. Our assumptions that you've been following are stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 634 poems. We just finished with 634. You'll know her by your foot. Now, Emily, you could make this argument. I mean, we've said so many crazy things in these lectures that are hyperbolic, but it seems to me that Emily is one of the greatest poets of all time in regards to time. No pun intended. I think T.S. Eliot learned a lot about the idea of time from his study of Emily Dickinson. And this is a poem that will play that game. She says it this way: I think the longest hour of all is when the cars have come and we are waiting for the coach. It seems as though the time, indignant that the joy was come, did block the gilded hands and would not let the seconds by, but slowest instant ends. The pendulum begins to count like little scholars loud. The steps grow thicker in the hall. The heart begins to crowd. Then I, my timid service done, though service 'twas of love, take up my little violin and further north remove. You'll remember this referencing to north just in in our recent poems that we worked with a few days ago. And the idea of going to the north is the idea of having, you'll remember at 631, I'm just going to read it to you. 'Tis true, our future's different lay. Your cottage faced the sun, while oceans and the north must be on every side of mine. This idea that, to go away, to not be in the center of action, is to go to the north. Those of us that kind of live north, we will laugh at this. Notice, she'll begin with the phrase, I think. And this is Emily as theorist, Emily as philosopher, if you will. I think the longest hour of all is when the cars have come. Now, here we're talking probably train cars. In other words, we're at the station, and in comes the train. In other words, the anticipation makes time slow down. Notice, and we are waiting for the coach. It seems as though the time indignant. By the way, it seems as a phrase from 509 and 590. We'll see it again in 718. Indignant gets used once and only once in all her poetry, and it's here. That the joy was come. Notice first it's the coach, now it's the joy. Did block the gilded hands. You'll remember gilded from 353. Of course, we're talking about the hands of the clock, right? And would not let the seconds by, but slowest instant ends. In other words, it's almost like the clock stops ticking or even starts going backwards. You've seen this maybe a couple of films where when you're looking at the clock constantly, it almost looks as if the hands are going backwards. The pendulum begins to count. And then this interesting simile, like little scholars loud. This idea that you guys are sitting looking at the clock while McGee drones on in one more of his lectures, and you're like, dude, how long is this going to take? Remember in Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 2, what is it? Love goes towards love as schoolboys from their books, but love from love towards school with heavy looks. I think Emily is channeling that line. The steps grow thicker in the hall with the anticipation. The heart begins to crowd. By the way, remember little scholars, remember 172 poems. She emphasizes fragility and the littleness, right? The heart begins to crowd. In other words, there's this anticipation and the emotion. If you've ever waited at an airport or, a train station, bus station, whatever, for someone who's arriving, the way in which time kind of slows down. She says, then I. Now, notice, she shifts from I think, and then she makes all these observations that are kind of outside of herself, and then all of a sudden, then I dash, my timid service done. She'll use timid or timidly in 20 of her poems. Takes us back to, of course, little. Service done. I think done is the key word of the poem. Though service 'twas of love, in other words, she was there out of love. Take up my little violin. We're back to little again. It's interesting, violin, if we've gone from clocks now to the strings of the violin. Take up my little violin and further north, remove. Now, one scholar has, reading this poem as Sam Boyles and Emily going back, says it this way, that, quote, she scuttles upstairs to her bedroom, end quote. Well, I think whether we know, whether you buy that this is about Sam Boyle's return and then her not seeing him or deciding to not see him and rather to go ahead and go back to her bedroom, it doesn't really matter in two-way. I think the argument here is that sometimes it is difficult, but maybe best to just walk away and to remove. And to be, well, obviously the clock metaphor is powerful here. Time, tick-tock, going slower. And then the violin referencing as well, which takes us, of course, back to our study of Pythagoras and the way in which music theory and time theory start to congeal. At 3A, well, we mentioned, of course, the classic line from Romeo and Juliet. And then, of course, I said T.S. Eliot. Well, I mean, the opening lines of Burt Norton, time present and time past, are both perhaps present and time future contained in time past. What's he say? If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. And then, of course, footfalls echo in the garden. At 3A, what was the time? You didn't want to do it, but you had to walk away, and the anticipation was killing you. Thank you.